To you, this week's topic affects everybody. To you, this week's topic affects everybody. You know how I know that? Because it affects everybody. It affects every human on the planet. It affects me. The reason I did this, because I did a little bit of, like, I will call it a clinical trial on myself over the course of the last, like, I think where I'm going on, like, into the third week of it. But what I noticed was I was over consuming unnecessarily. Now, what does that mean? Like, because I don't have foods in my house that are going to be quote unquote, like, foods that I shouldn't be eating. But I was still over consuming. I was unnecessarily eating. And I know that if I'm unnecessarily eating, you're probably unnecessarily eating. And so I wanted to figure out how I could break that cycle without doing anything radical, without doing anything crazy. And so I did it, and I'm going to explain to you how I did it. And it's as simple as one sheet of paper, right? This is how I broke my cycle of overeating in less than 10 days. And so I'm going to share that with you. And then I'm going to give you the main reasons, the 5 main reasons that people overeat, they overconsume. And then I'm going to give you 3 strategies, not counting the strategy of my one piece of paper strategy, that I believe is really all that you need. But I'm going to go deeper in the streets so that if you feel like you need some more data, you're going to get it today. And here's the reason. I felt like I was overeating because I didn't like the way my gastrointestinal system felt. I was feeling too full for too long. I was feeling bloated. When I looked in the mirror, my abdominal definition wasn't what I thought it should be. And therefore, I wanted to make some changes. I was assessing my calories and noticing that there were some unnecessary calorie bumps, even in the form of quote unquote good food. It's not like I was going in the kitchen and eating, pasta and bread and cookies and crackers and chips and things of that nature. That wasn't the case by any means. So what I did was this. I set out on a clinical research project of myself to figure out when and why I was over consuming. Because it wasn't at my portioned meal times. Because at my portioned meal times, I know the calculation based on visualization of my food. I know what I'm consuming. I know how many grams of protein, how many grams of fat, etc. that I'm eating, and I always feel satisfied after I complete that meal. At least I thought I did. And so I learned a few things about that as well. And so I'm going to share that with you too. So let me share my one sheeter with you. I'm going to share this at the end. I'm going to save my little research project for you to the end. So let's go over just the reasoning right now. So why do we overeat and how can we correct it? So overeating or consuming more food than the body needs for energy. Because really that's all food is. All food is an energy source. I know we like to glamorize it as far as like, taste and smells and yummy and good, all those things, right? Like we add an emotional component to food, but really all food is from a mechanical perspective is an energy source. So anytime that we're consuming more energy than we need, that is an energy excess. As we know, energy excesses store themselves as body fat. And what I want you to understand is when I'm talking about overeating, for me, it wasn't overeating at a mealtime, and it's probably not for you as well. It's probably overeating in the form of snacking. And what I realized is that when you're eating appropriately, you don't need to snack. So what I realized by my one sheeter is when I'm eating appropriately, snacking is unnecessary. I'm going to get to that. I'll keep going back to my sheet because I'm so excited about it. So overeating or consuming more food than the body needs for energy is the problematic place, right? That occurs for various negative reasons, but I'm going to give you 5. Right? So there's 5 reasons we overeat, and there's one in particular that I realized that I was doing, and you probably are too. So number 1 is emotional eating. We've all heard of this. Like many people turn to food in an emotional situation such as stress, anxiety, sadness, boredom, and they use food as a source of comfort or distraction when they're really not even physically hungry. So we've all kind of done that. We've all been in a phase or a place, but that's not a day-to-day, right? Like that's not like a day-to-day activity that you're emotionally eating, unless you're just a stress mess. And that's a whole other issue that we probably should dive into so we can help you get out of that. But emotional eating is usually like a one-off thing, like occasional. Number two is mindless eating. This is when we don't pay attention to our hunger cues or the amount of food we're actually consuming. So mindless eating often occurs like when you're watching TV, while you're working, while you're engaged in some other activity that is taking your mindfulness away from the actual food consumption. Like we've all done this like back in the day. Nobody's doing this anymore. But when we would sit on the couch and we'd watch a movie and we just have a bag of potato chips, right? And you're just hand in bag, hand to mouth, hand in bag, hand to mouth, hand in bag, hand to mouth, right? It's like it's mindless because there's no end point until the bag is usually empty. So that's what's considered mindless eating. Number three is like external cues, right? So when we get an external cue, like the smell of food or a social gathering, or some people are swayed by advertisements. Like they see something on TV and they're like, oh my God, I gotta go to Jimmy John's right now and get that sandwich, or I gotta go to McDonald's right now and get that shake, or whatever it is. And the availability of foods can be triggering to overeating as well. Meaning, like even if you're not hungry and you're at a party or a gathering and there's food everywhere, sometimes just through like the social anxiety of being there or the mindlessness of being there, you'll literally go by the snack table or the cookie table or the dessert table or the whatever it is table and like overconsume all night long, all day long, right? It's kind of like the break room at work. Like if there's food consistently out in the break room, like you'll make a lap through that bad boy like 2 or 3 times a day mindlessly, but it's the external cue of just the smell of knowing that it's in the office. Number 4 is like if you're on a restrictive eating plan. This is why we don't believe in deprivation or starvation, because we know it leads to overeating. We know it leads to overconsumption. So if you're on some kind of restrictive like plan that you've put on yourself, because I'm definitely not putting that on you, and where you've like strictly ruled out foods. And so what I mean by that is like right now you might not be in a place where you should be eating cheesecake on a regular basis, right? But you're making a decision, you're choosing to push off the cheesecake to a later date so that you can achieve your goals. You're not restricting and saying, I can never have cheesecake again, ever, right? You're never eat pizza again. Like that mental restrictiveness can lead to overeating, right? If we put foods as like off limits or forbidden, right? Then we'll get a preoccupation with those foods and then we'll just go crazy on them. But number 5 is the real one. Number 5 is what I found that I had. Like I realized that I didn't have a hunger problem. I had a habit problem. It was a habit. It wasn't hunger. And I bet you fall in this category too. So number 5 is probably the most important. And it's a habitual pattern. Overeating can be a habitual behavior, especially if individuals are accustomed to large, frequent consumptions of food. Like eating out of habit rather than genuine hunger actually is one of the most destructive. Because like I said, you're not going to a party every day, right? You're not emotionally eating every single day. Now you might be mindlessly eating, like if you're eating your lunch while you're watching TV, or if you're eating your lunch while you're doing TPS reports or whatever that might be, you might not have a connection to the food. And that might create a little bit of a exacerbation of how much food you should really be eating. But the majority of us have a habit problem. Like we have a problem with eating in a particular place and phase. So I'm going to give you my synopsis right now. I realized through the use of my one sheeter that I had a habit problem and not a hunger problem. And here's how I got to that place. I created this chart, and it was I put day 1 through 10, because it usually takes about 10 days of recognition and repetition to kind of form a new neural pathway, a new brain wave. And so what I did is I made this sheet, and at the top I put unnecessary eating. So, because it was unnecessary eating. Because in my brain, I'm like, I know this is unnecessary, but why am I doing it? How often am I doing it? And how am I going to stop it? So here's how I was going to stop it. I made the declaration that I was only for 10 days going to consume food during my feeding time. Like not during my feeding window, but during my feeding time. When I sat down for my first meal, this was the amount of food I was going to consume until the next time I sat down for my next meal. There was going to be no intra-meal snacking whatsoever. Zero. And when Jay throws the gauntlet down, the gauntlet is down. There's no deviations. There's no, well, I'm feeling a little hungry. Didn't matter. So I don't negotiate with a terrorist, right? And so I'm a terrorist when I think I want to eat something, and so are you. So you don't negotiate with terrorists. And so basically you say, listen, when I say this, this is what I do. So what I did is I put day 1 through 10 on my chart. We're going to give this to you just in case you want to try it. And I said, what I'm going to do is every time I go in the kitchen and open the pantry or open the fridge, in my normal habitual process, I'm going to put a little dot down. I'm going to put this little dot that delineated, that denoted that I was in the kitchen and I was in my habit seeking pattern of I'm going to get a snack. And so because I didn't fulfill that at every dot, what I noticed is on day 1, I went to the cabinet in the kitchen more times than I even knew that I probably would have. Now, would I have done that if I would have succumbed and had the snack? No, because I would have gotten the reward. I would have gotten the treat that I wanted, and I wouldn't have went back. So day 1, I put a dot beside every time I went in the kitchen, and I didn't deviate. And then day 2, I did the same thing. I didn't deviate, but every time I went in there, I put this in the kitchen and I made a little dot. Dot. There you are. What are you doing? What are you doing in here, bro? And I would ask myself every time, what are you doing in here? I say, are you really hungry? No. Statistically speaking, Jay Nixon, you cannot be hungry. Here's why. Here's how many grams of protein. Here's how many grams of fat that you had for lunch. Here's the output that you've done for the day. You're not hungry. It's statistically impossible. And I would say, okay, Jay, if it's statistically impossible, then I'm going to take my butt back to my office and go back to work. I did that every single time. For every dot, I had that same conversation. On day 2, I went less than I did day 1. On day 3, I went less than I did day 2. Day 4, less than day 3, and so on until I got to about day 7. And I put dots down, but I don't think I was really even going in there to get a snack. I wouldn't even write down when I went in the kitchen to refill my water, to put some more ice in my cup, to anything. If I breached the kitchen, it was like an alarm went off and I had to put a dot down. So then what I found out is by day 7, 8, I wasn't even going to the cupboard anymore. So these dots are really not even true. I was just really going in there to get more water, do whatever it is I was going to do. Whatever. By day 10, completely broken. Like I don't even think about, I don't find myself in the kitchen unnecessarily. I'm not thinking about like, I wish I could have a snacky snack right now. And this goes for after dinner as well. I made dots between my first feeding and my second feeding, and I only eat 2 big meals a day. And then after dinner, I did the same thing. If I found myself in the kitchen, I had to put a dot. If I was in there, looking for some consumption. And since day 1, right, I think we're like, I stopped counting because I've got a new pattern now. I no longer identify as a snacker. I don't have to snack. I'm not snacking, but here's what I did. I also noticed that I increased my protein portion at my feeding time, and that has so what I did is by the time I got to like day 5, I said, okay, if I'm still going in the kitchen at day 5, and I know I'm not going to get anything because I've thrown down the gauntlet and I've made the rule, and when I make a rule, I don't break the rule. I don't break promises to myself. If I'm still going in the kitchen, what could I do to possibly alleviate any true hunger that was hidden inside of my habit? And I said, okay, well, the thing we could do, and I've also upped my workout intensity has gone up as well. So that requires a little bit more caloric intake for me and a little bit more higher protein. So what I did is on day 5, I started the increase of my protein intake with my lunch. So, and my dinner. So if I would normally have a half a pound of ground beef and 2 eggs, I was now eating half a pound of ground beef and 4 eggs. or a pound of ground beef and 2 eggs, something of that nature. I was increasing my caloric intake only through protein, no other sources, no more fat. Obviously, I'm going to get a little bit of fat if I'm increasing, the ground beef or the steak or the eggs, but not fat in the form of like nuts or more oils or more butters or more anything of that nature. Strictly just trying to use protein as my driver. And what I noticed was that really helped with all of the habitual thoughts of even going to the kitchen and having more food. I'll give you an example. Like right now, it's almost 3 o'clock. I broke my fast at 10:45 today, and the thought of even consuming food right now would be I'm disinterested in even consuming food. So what I'll do when we finish this is I'll go for my afternoon, my brain break walk, and that will probably facilitate that movement, will facilitate more hunger. I'll have my final meal of the day probably around 5:30, and then there won't be any more consumption for the rest of the day, and I won't need anything. I won't want anything. Right. So I'm going to give you this sheet. Try it if you want it. It was really more of an eye opener for me to see how many times I was really going to the kitchen versus not once I started breaking the habit. So there's 3 really effective ways, right? This, not including this. This is kind of my habit breaker or my habit creator, if you will. And the first of the 3 ways is just being more mindful. And I know that mindful word is really just like, blah, it's almost like gross now. It's like we've just grossed it up. But I'm going to use it in the context of this because it really is the only way. More thoughtful, more present, maybe is a better word, more present with our practice of consumption. So doing this is going to involve paying more attention to your eating experience. That's going to include like the sensation of hunger and fullness, both before, during, and after you eat. The actual foods you're consuming, the taste and the textures, any emotions associated with the consumption. And you really want to slow that process down and really be present during the meal. So this means like, don't be scrolling through TikTok. Don't be watching, something on TV. Like really be present with your food if you want to break the habit. Like if you want to break and get really more depth into it and just really get present with your meal. This is going to make you become more aware of the sensations that you're experiencing, like pre, intra, and post consumption, because your body is going to start to give you cues and signals whenever you're getting to the full point. And this is going to prevent overeating during a normal feeding window. And so some tips to do that would be just simply slowing down, like slow down your pace and rate cadence of fork to mouth, paying really good attention to the physical cues of hunger before, during, and after the meal, recognizing the difference between actual physical hunger and then emotional triggers or emotional eating or habitual eating. Like sometimes what I would find myself doing is I would have my normal feeding and then I would say, okay, well, a few like 10 minutes later, I'd be like, well, I feel like I need a little more protein. Like I would just tell myself that. I feel like I need a little more protein, so I'm going to go have like half a sludge. What I realized is when I was appropriately eating, I didn't necessarily need that. Now, because I love sludge, what I'll do is I incorporate that into my actual consumption phase, and I'll have the half a pound of ground beef, the 2 eggs, and then a little bit of sludge, just so I can make sure that I'm satisfying that craving for that particular texture and taste that I do love. So minimizing distractions while you eat, such as television, electronic devices, like just being present. And then listening to the body's signals of fullness and stopping when you're satisfied and before you're full, even if this means there's food left on your plate. Some of you guys haven't mastered the next one yet, which is the mastery of portion control. And so let's dive into that, and that might help with that food left on the plate scenario. So what portion control really is, monitoring your portion sizes to effectively strategize perfect consumption. And this really means you're going to have to get mindful about the necessary nutritional requirements that you need. That means understanding, like, what is this? So this is why I try to get you guys to track when you first start, so that you know what 45 grams of protein on a plate looks like, so that you know that half a pound of ground beef and 2 eggs, you know what protein fat quantity that really is. Whatever it is you're eating, if you'll track it, then you can actually quantify it visually where you don't even need to. And then you can start using portioning techniques, such as like using the palm of your hand as to identify like 30 grams of protein, understanding what 30 grams of protein, knowing that eggs have 6 grams of protein per egg. But just knowing those things is going to be help you learn to estimate portion sizes more correctly. They say that the average healthy person underestimates their caloric intake by about 20%. The average overweight or obese person is up to 50%. That means you're underestimating the caloric intake that you're experiencing. So being more mindful, recognizing, the portions you have on the plate, even dividing those meals into the appropriate portion before you start consuming. So let's say we all go out to dinner and we go to the Cheesecake Factory. Like the Cheesecake Factory is known for over portioning everything. So really, if you go to the Cheesecake Factory and you order a meal, you're going to get enough caloric intake. And they even put the little caloric intake thing on the actual menu now. You're going to get enough calories for about 3 separate meals. And so if you really are interested in learning how to not overeat, then what you would do is you would basically take those portions and divide and conquer before you even begin to consume. Meaning get your plate, ask for a to-go thing before you even start eating, make the portions into that, put them in the to-go plate, and then what you have on your plate is now the appropriate portion for one setting, one meal. Right? That takes a lot of discipline. That takes a little bit of effort, but the dividends are absolutely astronomical. Number 3 is addressing your emotional eating, right? Developing alternative coping mechanisms to deal with emotional eating can really reduce the reliance on food as a comfort. Because really people always say that. Like people say, well, food's just comfort for me. And then my next question is, but is the body that you're currently living in comfortable? And they'll always say, well, no, I need to lose like 50 to 60, 70 pounds. Well, so then the food's really not comforting, is it? The food's really applying more stress to the actual stressful situation. So if you can develop strategies such as, going for a walk, practicing, the deep breathing relaxation techniques, engaging with somebody else, like using this group, using myself and Marissa as ways of breaking those emotional patterns and developing stronger stress coping skill mechanisms, then that will remove the emotional eating from the table, and it won't be that habitual pattern of comfort leading to more stress. You can do this by identifying what the actual triggers are and then finding alternative ways to address them. So like I said, so just developing those practices. For me, it's always movement. Like I think that's just the easiest thing to do. It's like if I get in a place where it's like I feel like over consuming for any reason whatsoever, all it takes is a walk around the block for me, and it completely resets my rhythm and resets my brain waves where I don't even think about that when I get back. Right. And then you can keep a food mood journal, right? If you're kind of like if you're more of a visual person, keep a food mood journal. That basically is going to show you when and why you're triggered to go eat. Even if it's post extravaganza, write it down and say, this is what happened. This is what I did. Here's how I need to move forward in the future and get past this. Sometimes the recognition of that on paper will actually help you move past it if you really do want to overcome it. Again, I said seek support for underlying issues. Like that's what this group is for. That's what we're for. Engaging in regular physical activity, movement is going to improve your mood naturally, going to boost serotonin, dopamine, all of your happiness chemicals, and it's actually going to reduce your stress and reliance on food. And then using the toolboxes, right? Like using the toolbox that we've been building for you for so long, and understanding that all of the things and all of the resources you have inside of that. And then understanding this, if your nutrition is where it needs to be, overconsumption is 9 chances out of 10 going to be a habit. And here's the beautiful thing. We know we can break habits. We know we can form new habits, right? And we know this because of time-tested people who have stopped smoking, which is probably one of the most challenging habits to break. People who've stopped alcohol, people who've stopped doing these habitual things, and they replace them with something really positive and powerful. All right. So for me, it's just an awareness factor. Like once I looked at my white sheet and I realized, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, what are you doing? It almost became fun for me because I'm like, I love to win. And this is like, I already knew I was going to be the champ at the end of this, but I acted like it had a chance. And so I would always keep making my dots every single day. But I knew when I got to a certain point, I'm like, the game's over. Like I beat this, and it feels good to be like, I feel lighter. I feel fresher. I feel more cognitively in tune throughout the day. I'm actually enjoying my feeding times more because I'm not unnecessarily snacking. And guys, my unnecessarily snacking could have been like eating like a fourth of a pound of ground beef. Could have been eating 2-3 hard-boiled eggs. It was just the unnecessary consumption. And it's not that I was afraid of those calories. It was, I don't like to do things that don't serve me in the long term. And I wasn't feeling as crisp and as clean and as lean as I like to feel. And once you get really in tune with your body and you start to feel those things, feeling good is more important to me than over consuming food. Like it just is, and it always will be. And so you've got to really start to get mindful about, how does my body feel? Like I noticed that my sleep's been better. My workouts have been better. Like everything has been better from just simply changing one little habit that really, it wasn't like deterring from my life. I wasn't adding weight, but I did feel a little bit bloated from time to time because I was over, it was too often. I was eating too often because it wasn't hunger, it was a habit. And so once you recognize that it's a habit instead of hunger, it's like, this is really easy to break. I hope you guys enjoyed that show as much as I did. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, I am so thankful and so grateful that you take the time to listen to the show every week. And it means the absolute world to me. If you've got a little bit of time, it would mean everything if you would go and give the show a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on, as well as share it with a friend or family member that you think might find value in the show. And again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being an awesome human and listening to the Overweight Mind podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you again next week. All right, bye.